Hello class, my name is Annie George. I'm your usual facilitator for this course, PHS 511, Applied Epidemiology. In the previous lecture, we discussed applied epidemiology of communicable diseases, where we defined what a communicable disease is, and we understood those terms that are used in communicable disease epidemiology. In continuation of our lesson today, we'll go further to talk about the general principles involved in the control and prevention of communicable diseases. I will try my best to make it a very lovely learning experience for you by breaking it down the way you can understand. So let's get on the ride and see how far we can go in our learning. Permit me to share my screen with you so that we'll get started. So in this lecture, we'll be talking about the general principles of control of communicable diseases. What are the objectives of our lesson? The objectives is that by the time we complete it with this lesson, you should know and understand what epidemiologic triangle is and its components and characteristics. We should be able to know the control measures target on chain of infection, understand the methods of transmission of communicable diseases, and how to apply the knowledge in prevention and control measures. So what is epidemiologic triangle? Let's start with that. Epidemiologic triangle is basically an epidemiologic triad of what we call the agent, the host, and the environment. So what are the components of this triangle? Like we said, the components consist of the host, the agent, and the environment. Now, there's what we call triangle characteristics. What is the character, or what are the characteristics of the components of that triangle, the host, the environment, and the agent? Now, looking at the host, the characteristics of the host includes the age of the host, the sex of the host, the race, genetic profile, previous disease of the host, immune status. All these factors determines the susceptibility of the host to infection. The environment looks at the temperature, the altitude, the humidity of a place, overcrowding, housing, neighborhoods, the water we drink, the food we eat, radiation, pollution, and noise. All these factors constitute what we call environmental characteristics that makes one susceptible to disease or infection. Then you look at the agent. Agent can be biologic agent, like the bacteria, the viruses. It can be chemical, like poison, alcohol, smoke. It can be physical agents, like trauma, radiation, fire. It can be nutritional, whether there is lack of nutrition in our components or the excess of it. So, but for the purposes of this lecture, we shall be concentrating more on biologic agents as agents that, causes communicable disease. So what is a host? A host is simply a complex organism which includes man or human that is capable of being infected by the infectious agent. That is a host. A host can be a primary host or definitive host. In this case, the parasite lives and attains maturity in that host. That is what we call the sexual stage of the parasite is carried out in that host. Such a host is a primary or definitive host. Then we have the secondary or intermediate host. In this case, the parasite in its larval stage or what we call the asexual stage in the host. Such a host is a secondary or intermediate host. Then we look at the agent. Agents, like we said, biologic agents is usually microorganisms which are capable of producing infection or infectious disease in the host. There are other agents, but we're concentrating on biologic agents, like I earlier told you, because of communicable diseases that are infectious diseases. And these agents include, biologic agents include bacteria, virus, the helminths, or the fungus. These are biologic agents. Then we look at the environment. What constitutes the environment? Like we said, they are all external factors and conditions which affect organisms' life and development. They are classified into physical environment, like the air we breathe, the water we take, the temperature, our radiation. Then you have the biological environment, where the plants and animals that are around us are considered. Then the social environment, like the family, the surroundings, the culture of the people, and practices. What are the control measures target on chain of infection? The chain of infection is usually a factor of the transmission process, the agent, the host, and the environment. The transmission process sits in the middle of that triangle of agent, host, and environment, and determines the movement of the agent to the host in the environment where the host lives in. What are the methods of transmission of communicable diseases and control measures application? We have direct method, what we call the direct contact method, how communicable diseases can be transmitted. Sexual intercourse is one of those direct contact methods. You could get HIV, hepatitis B or C, or syphilis and gonorrhea as well from sexual intercourse. Through touching, you could get it, like skin infections. You could get contact dermatitis, infectious dermatitis from, direct body contact with someone who has it. Kissing as well, you could get some oral infections from kissing. Then direct method continues. The blood transfusion, HIV, hepatitis B and C could be gotten through blood transfusion. Breastfeeding, HIV can be transferred from mother to child from breastfeeding. Then transplacental transmission, like toxoplasmosis, congenital malaria, are infections that can be gotten from mother to child in the womb. Exposure to soil, like tetanus tetanus infection, can be gotten through exposure of a wound to soil. You could get the organism called Clostridium tetani by exposure to soil. The water we drink, decomposing compost, can be sources of infection. Droplets and other particles are also, like COVID, you could get COVID through droplets. Then indirect method, you have vehicles that actually convey these infections to infectious agents to the host, like through the food we eat. Food can be a vehicle, water. Then contaminated materials and objects, what we call the fomites, can also be vehicles to get infected. Then you have vector-borne infections, like malaria is usually transmitted, the parasite is usually transmitted by the bite of a mosquito. So mosquito is a vector in malaria parasite infection. So how do you take care of that? Through sanitation and through the use of insecticides, mosquito-treated nets are ways of controlling and preventing infection of these organisms. So you take care of your surroundings, use insecticide treated nets, and then also the spray of insecticides can help to take care of vector-borne infections. Now, airborne infections are usually respiratory. They go through the respiratory tract. So when you transmit infection through the host, what happens? So the mechanism of entry of such infection could be the skin, the mucous membrane, the oral cavity, the respiratory tract, or through parenteral transmission like IV injections through the veins, by drug abusers, or even in the hospitals, you could get infection through the venous channel. That's what is called parenteral transmission. Then upon entry of such infectious agent, what happens? Usually when the infectious agent gets into the body, there's what we call pathogenicity. That is the ability of such infectious agents to cause disease is dependent on the host defenses. The host defenses determines not just the ability for that infectious agent to cause disease, but also the severity of the disease, whether it's going to be mild in you, moderate, or it's going to be severe. Let's take COVID, for example, coronavirus. People get infected, but they do not show symptoms. So such people that do not show symptoms are asymptomatic. That means they got infected, but their host defenses prevented them from getting down with the disease. But then for those who finally get down with the disease, who get infected but show signs and symptoms of the disease, that means they got diseased. In such cases, some people have mild symptoms, they have moderate symptoms, and they have severe symptoms. So the host defenses determines what we call the pathogenicity of the agent, that is the ability of that agent to cause disease, and also the severity of the disease in the individual. So the immunity and vaccination of such individual helps to prevent some diseases. Healthy practices is also a factor, body hygiene, general hygiene. How do you take care of yourself? These are ways of preventing some of these infections. And then what we call the social determinants of health. The income someone, whether you want to believe it or not, the income someone gets, his level of education, his level of employment, all are called social determinants that actually affect someone's health and well-being. The income you get helps you to make the right choices in terms of your spending capacity in what is good for your health. The neighborhood, it determines the neighborhood where you live, a healthy environment, So all these factors play a role in prevention and control of communicable diseases. Then transmission through the environment, the water supply. What of the quality of the water supply and the quantity of water supply? Do we have clean water that has good quality? What of the quantity of the water? Do we have enough that will take care of our basic needs? Then the food hygiene. How do we preserve our food? How do we get our food? How do we preserve it? How do we prepare it? And how do we finally eat it? That is hygiene. So solving the problems of poor housing and designing, and preventing overcrowding can also help to control communicable diseases. Our surroundings, sanitation, good sewage disposal, and refuse disposal hygiene also helps to prevent and control communicable diseases. So in summary, in this lesson, we've learned that the epidemiologic triangle is made up of the host, the agent, and the environment. We also saw the components of these, very important components in the transmission of communicable diseases. We also saw that control measures target on infection, on chain of infection, that looks at the characteristics of the host, age, sex, location, race, ethnic group, and all that, play a very big role in control of communicable diseases. We also looked at the application of these characteristics in the prevention and control of communicable diseases. I want to thank you specially for listening, and this concludes this lecture, and I wish you all the best and hope that you stay safe, wear your mask, maintain social distancing, and stay safe.